we built this road that we call the coffee highway between some of the important coffee growing cities. 4 lanes, 2 in one direction, 2. But there is no sidewalk, so the people have to walk in these drainage canals like this because there is no place to walk. This is a lack of respect for human dignity. This is not democratic, especially when in society only 15% of people have cars.
I want to thank the Harris School of Public Policy for organizing this event and the International House at the University of Chicago for its generous support of this and other important discussions of international affairs that have been co-sponsored with the Center for Latin American Studies. Tonight's briefing will be in the form of a talk by Enrique Penalosa with 3 responses. Mr. Penalosa is a visiting scholar at New York University and an international consultant on urban development, and of course from 1998 to 2000 he was mayor of Bogota. His policies during that term are credited with the transformation of Bogota into a much more livable city, and so he'll set our agenda tonight for a discussion of sustainable urban development. Ronald Grzywinski is former president of Hyde Park Bank, the bank we all know and love, and currently founder, chairman, and CEO of the innovative Shore Bank Corporation, which has grown from a South Shore-based community lending bank into what's now a gigantic Midwest-centered but national conglomerate of socially responsible and community-based banking institutions. And Shore Bank also undertakes, although on a smaller scale, international development projects in areas such as microlending. Alicia Mendez is research associate and assistant professor at the Harris School of Public Policy at the University of Chicago. She took her PhD in economics at Boston University after graduate work at the Instituto Torquato de Tella in Argentina. And she conducts research on inequality, wages, subsidies, and educational policy in Argentina. And finally, Luis Medina is assistant professor of political science. He also has a PhD in economics from Stanford University, is a researcher on modeling and game theory and their relation to political institutions. And he is, of course, a Colombian whose research has led him to an interest in paths of peacemaking in societies undergoing civil conflict. So without further introduction, I'll turn the microphone over to Mr. Penalosa, who will speak on the urban in international economic development.
Thank you, Dean. I want to thank the Harris School, the University of Chicago, and Ms. Puentes, Mrs. Puentes, Ms. Puentes now, and for this invitation, this possibility to be here. I first would like to make a very brief story about some of the things that we did that contributed to transform Bogota over a period of about 10 years or so. First of all, we worked in the poorest neighborhoods, and we were able at some point, when I was mayor, to have more than 1,500 former street people, or between young and adults, working as contractors of City Hall, which we organized many job programs with. It's not the time at this time to say it. Infant mortality, which is one of the best indicators of social development because it has to do with water supply, with medical assistance, with all sorts of things, went between 94 and 2003, between 27 per 1,000 in the city to 18 per 1,000. Resources, you will notice that I am sometimes mentioning different time periods, but it's basically, sometimes it's only three years of the time I was mayor, some other is like 10-year periods, but in general it's this area. The resources for health and child care and what we call social welfare increased by almost 150% between 94 and 2000. It went from 326 billion pesos to 800 billion pesos. Growth of 243%, to be exact, I'm sorry. The education, the places in the education system, public education in Bogota, grew between 97 and 2003 in 269,000, and in a growth, an increase of 44%. Just to show the increase in education, the schools that of resources for education, of funds for education, I will say that the budget for education between 95 and 2000 increased by 500% in real terms. And just to finish these general statistics, I will say that the homicides, the murders in Bogota over the period between 93 and 2002 went down from 4,352 annually to 1,905. This means that if we would extrapolate this for a 10-year period, this means 25,000 less murders in a 10-year period. This means that the murder rate went down like from about 84 per 100,000 inhabitants per year to 27 per 100,000 inhabitants per year in a country that was practically at war and with an economy going through a recession most of this time and very low growth rates at other times. So what I'm going to try to talk about is about some of the things that we did that transformed the attitude of people in Bogota from one where citizens used to think their worst predicament in life was to have to live in Bogota. It sounds exaggerated, but really was a very unique situation of a population very much disliking the city they had to live and without much self-respect, much less self-pride, to a situation where there is pride and more than that, confidence that the future can be better. Why is this? Because I think there is a model, there is a new city vision, there is a new vision of how cities should be. It's not because all things have been solved. I think we have done only maybe 3% of what has to be done. But what is important is that now there is a different vision of perhaps the course that we must follow in order to have a better and happier life. We have a more thought out model. I'd like to say that Bogota, very briefly, Bogota has about 7 million inhabitants. It's 8,500 feet above sea level. The temperature is this, and we have about 38,000 hectare city in a plateau that is about 660,000 city. Bogota is an interesting and relevant case because it's just one of many developing country cities. According to the United Nations numbers, developing world cities population will grow by more than 2 billion inhabitants over the next 30 years. So the sustainability, environmental and social sustainability of the world depends to a large degree on what is to happen there. I would say that if a city is good for children and for all people by themselves, it will be good for everybody else. Cities, when I was invited here, and the title of my talk here relates to economic development. It says development and urban and cities in the third world. And I would say that cities' quality of life can be a very crucial factor in economic development for the future. At first, if we are to go to the description such as Daniel Bell's coming of post-industrial society, societies used to be agricultural, and land was the source of economic growth and wealth and power. This is why countries used to fight each other, or states, or feudal states, in order to grab land from each other. Afterwards, it was capital that became the main source of economic growth, and this is why nations and states try to subsidize and attract capital investment, industrial development. But more and more, it's very clear that in this post-industrial society, or a new economy, or any way that we want to describe this, what is critical is to attract and retain highly qualified people. And in this context, I think urban development, quality of urban development is crucial, because in Colombia, for example, it's not likely that we're going to develop world brands such as Boeing or Ford or Microsoft, but maybe we are able to attract a 3,000 engineer research facility from Microsoft. And when Microsoft decides to do this type of investments, maybe they will take into consideration things such as quality of urban life. But also, of course, quality of life is an end in itself, and a very powerful means to construct equality. Communism collapse cannot mean that we forget about equality. I mean, some people think that as communists collapse, we just can't worry about economic development, and that other issues will simply be solved through time. I think that's wrong. Over the last 300 years, for example, most wars, revolutions, have had to do with creating more equality. All great social efforts. So it's not like we can just forget about it all of a sudden. But the question is, once we have adopted market economy and private property as the means to manage most of society's resources, inequality, income inequality is unavoidable. The question is, what kind of equality now? I would say that the way we build our cities, and I will try to show this in this presentation, and organized city lives can be a very powerful tool for constructing a more egalitarian and integrated society. I would say that quality of life distribution may be even more important than income distribution. If tomorrow somebody that has $5 billion moves to Bogota or to Colombia, immediately income distribution will be much worse than before. However, our society, of course, will be better. So income distribution is difficult to change. We have to change it with means and tools such as those I mentioned at the start, trying to charge taxes as high as possible to those that have resources, to invest as much as possible in the poorest people of society. But tax limitations, there are limitations to tax rates, for example, because Colombia cannot institute a 70% income tax rate, for example, because all investments would move elsewhere, and we would be left without jobs and investment. Therefore, tax rates in this globalized world are becoming almost a parameter that we cannot much change. So what can we do? I think there is much that we can do, and at least in this urban case, we can do a lot. What is quality of life? I would say quality of life, especially that matters to children. Access to nutrition, to education, to violin classes, to sports, to parks, to recreation, to happiness. We have to achieve, to advance towards that. Moreover, I would say that if we have a democracy, we must agree that the public good must prevail over private interest. And this, apparently, is just poetry. In all constitutions, the first article in the Constitution talks about the equality of all citizens before the law. But if we believe in that, then we must believe its consequence, that public good must prevail over private interest. If we do believe this, for example, in a third world city where 80% of the people take public transport every day, we could ban car use tomorrow during peak hours And at least 80% of the people would be better off the next day. We will have less traffic jams, less public investment in road infrastructure that would free resources to invest in schools and parks and libraries. People would take much less time for transport that would leave them time to enjoy with their families. So when we talk about this prevalence of the public good over private interest, and we really make it the guiding principle of all our urban design and urban policy, we may be surprised at how different the decisions would be than those we are taking today, just because we are following and copying the advanced societies as if we are trying to be fifth-rate copies of these societies. I will give this type of example. This is a picture of some slums in Cartagena, Colombia. This is in Ho Chi Minh City in Vietnam. But we find them all over the world. Vietnam, Delhi, Jakarta, Sao Paulo, Bogota. It cannot be that there was a mayor that was corrupt or dumb. There is a problem with the system. The land, private land around growing cities does not work because the market system works when we have an increase in price of tomatoes, for example, above the market price, the supply increases and the prices go back down. The beauty of capitalism is that prices tend to equal costs. But in the case of land around growing cities, we can increase the prices all we want, and the supply of land that is accessible to water, education, transport, jobs, this doesn't happen. So there is no justification, even for the most radical capitalists, for having private land around growing cities. And this is the cause of this type of things. Of course, we find all sorts of proposals saying that there are very sophisticated taxing schemes that would tax surplus value out of this land. It never works in the developing world. I don't know of one single case where this has worked. And I could give many examples. So in Bogota, we did a small urban land reform project. This is what we call Metro Vivienda. This is not all of it. This is one of several projects that we did, where we bought through eminent domain, or voluntarily, if it was the case, land around the city, big chunks of land. We made quality urbanism. For example, all of this is a park, all of this is a park, all of this is a park. This is a cross, pedestrian streets, this is a pedestrian street, etc. To make the story short, we would sell to private builders big chunks of land that they would have to develop in less than 2 years, and the highest price they could sell houses there was about less than $9,000 each house. But as there were some national government subsidies, and so a person paying basically $1,000 down payment and about $50 a month could get a nice house with top quality urbanism. But this could be done in a massive scale in the country. This is just, we did a small project, and by the way, this is self-sustaining. This is a land bank. The land is not given away. And of course, when we put 30,000 people in a project like this, the commercial areas where you're going to put shops are expensive. Therefore, the idea is that we are able to, when this is done, more land is bought farther out or elsewhere so that we achieve a land bank. But of course, this could be done in a massive scale with national government intervention. Look, Bogota has only 35,000 hectares. We could buy today 15,000 hectares around Bogota for less than $1 billion, about $700 million. We could have 7,000 hectare park, another 7,000 hectares for a land bank for low-cost housing. This is very easy to do. And I think is not the time now, but it's much more important to have urban land reform than rural land reform, because there is much more of a monopoly in the supply of land in urban areas than the monopoly that there could be in agricultural markets, which there really isn't. This is the type of land that we have around Bogota. We also did, of course, in our projects to improve the low-income neighborhoods, community organization. Communities would themselves be organized. We made a big effort to promote their organization, and they would propose projects. And they themselves would judge who would be those selected, so that there would not be political interference that some community would be selected because the mayor had gotten more votes there or something. So they themselves selected the winners. And we would contract with them the projects they themselves propose and design. We would supply engineering and architectural support, and these are $30,000 to $40,000 projects. The most important project is not the stairway. The most important byproduct. This is, I would say, almost a byproduct. The important thing about this type of activity is community organization, self-esteem, confidence in your capacity to improve your own living conditions. If you go to this neighborhood and you ask them who did this project, they will never tell you it was City Hall. It was themselves. It was they who conceived it, they who designed it, they who built it. They got some money that somebody was giving somewhere in the government. But so we did more than 700 of these projects in 3 years. Sometimes micro parks, because there is no place to put these parks, but this gives a lot of self-assurance and confidence and creates community. We built, I mean, I don't agree much with this situation in the US, for example, where nurseries are not a mandatory public service for the government. We do believe there should be, and in Bogota, in Colombia, unfortunately, we have 28% of children under 5 who live without their father. So nurseries are crucial, even for those who do live with their fathers. So we created some very high-quality nurseries. This, for example, is one of the most important Colombian architects, Rogelio Salmona, one of the most important Latin American architects, in these very poor neighborhoods. I like to emphasize the symbolic importance of buildings. If you go to a middle-aged town, you can see from 10 miles away what was important to that community. It was religion. You see the church towering over the town. If we make extremely beautiful and important schools, libraries, nurseries, this is much more important than to have television commercials saying that children should be well treated or that children are important, that education is important. This becomes a symbol in the community of, and this creates values. When this building is more important and more beautiful than the shopping mall next to it or something like that. Schools, we built a lot of schools again. We rebuilt and we worked in more than 200 school facilities, but we built more than 22 new schools with some of the very good, best Colombian architects. We even did some very innovative organization, because in Colombia, as in all developing countries, the best schools are the private schools where the upper middle classes go to school. Therefore, we were able to get some of the best schools, private schools in Bogota, to manage these public schools in some of the poorest areas in the city, to put some competition to the traditionally very heavily unionized public education. And of course, this competition will be good for the children. The children are the only ones that are going to be winners. But you can see what a school like this, a symbol, represents in a neighborhood like this. This is the result of private property of land. I mean, this is not haphazard. This is not the result of nature. This is the clear result. The private property of land around growing cities is a design whose result is this. This is the purpose of the system. This is not an aberration. or a deviation. This is what private property is designed to produce. Some people become rich every day because they own some farms around the city without doing any work, which is fine. I don't mind if people make money without working. They do it all the time at Wall Street and things like this. Unfortunately, the problem is that the consequence that there will be many generations of children. This we were able to put, as I mentioned, water supply, schools, electricity, telephone, everything, but they don't have enough parks, for example. They don't have enough green. And how many generations will go by before we are able to repair this? We also built some libraries. Again, these are symbols. I think in many developing countries, the fancy buildings are airports. You go to Asia, in every country, fancy airport, fancy international architects, because that's where tourists and investors come. I think it's much more important to put the best, the most important buildings to serve the people. When a low-income person goes into a very high-quality library, I think the meaning of citizenship changes. It acquires some meaning because this person has access. This person that lives in a very small house, sometimes they have mud, streets without pavement, they have to walk in the mud sometimes, and they come into this place and they feel it's for them. Not because they have money, not because they have a PhD from a fancy university, but simply because they have a Colombian ID in their pocket. And so, again, this creates certain values. If this is more beautiful than the shopping mall, this is the library, for example, again by Salmona's architect. With all of these libraries have very big parks around them, near them. They're in the middle of bicycle path networks and pedestrian street networks, so that if somebody goes out walking, almost they get to the library. And these libraries that we built are getting more than 350,000 readers every month. They even got Bill Gates and Melinda Gates Foundation prize of $1 million and things. This used to be a sewage treatment, a sewage transfer, garbage transfer facility that had been abandoned. This was the ramp where the trucks would come up, the compactors to dump and we made this library. And we think we are also creating values again. Education not as a means to become more productive simply, but also as a means to be happy, to be able to appreciate life more. Again, some of the best Colombian architects worked in these libraries. 3 big libraries and 12 smaller ones, children's rooms in all of them, computers. By the way, we put also a system where we put a system of 14,000 computers with internet in all public schools in the city. I'd like to go into the public space issue. For 5,000 years, all city streets were pedestrian. People would mingle with horses and horse carriages. This is Tokyo, in the Tokyo Museum, where they have this representation of how Tokyo used to be. Again, a little more advanced Tokyo. It's very hard to get killed by a horse carriage. You may get hurt, but rarely you get killed. But by a car, it's very easy and likely that you get killed. This is Paris, near 1900. A child could walk 10 blocks to his uncles or grandparents and without any danger. They were cities for people. But moreover than that, poor and rich would meet there as equals. But over the last 80 years, really, we have been making cities much more for cars mobility than for children's happiness. This is New York. Manhattan, also around 1900, it was a pedestrian city. We should have started to, as cars appeared, we should have started to build a parallel network, half the streets for cars and half for pedestrians. But of course, it didn't happen. We just started to build roads for cars, especially because at first cars were very much like horse carriages, and so people didn't think they were going to be that much different. And when we didn't, before we realized it, we had made an environment for cars. But we need to walk. Beyond survival needs, we need to walk. We could survive inside an apartment all our lives, just as a bird survives inside a cage. But I think we are happier if we can go out to wide sidewalks. The same way a bird would be much happier in a cage the size of this auditorium than inside a small cage, and happier still to fly free. Here we are talking about things that are not rationally measurable. I mean, the ceiling of this building could be maybe half as high, and the building would function, this auditorium would function in a similar way as it functions now. But will we feel the same way? Or is something in our heart that feels different? When we are making cities, much of the things that we have to decide are ideological. There are no right or wrong answers. I cannot prove that it's better to be in a city where buildings are only 3 or 4 stories high and not 30 or 40 stories high. I cannot prove that pedestrian-only streets are good for something, because they're just are good for feeling good, for people to create community and integrate themselves. I cannot prove that a 10-meter sidewalk is better than a 2-meter sidewalk. These are ideological decisions. And, but clearly, it seems to me that if we make an environment for pedestrians, we are going to make a better city. In Europe, we've had always, there are more than 2,000 cities or towns that have quaint pedestrian downtowns. But in the third world, where cities are exploding, why not make new areas of the growth area in cities with a giant pedestrian street network? This is a almost an 18-kilometer pedestrian street that we built through some of the poorest neighborhoods in Bogota. In some cases, through open fields or through poor neighborhoods. This is part of the land that we bought for the city land bank. So now there is city around here. This is a bicycle path here, palm trees in the middle, trees. I mean, this will have big trees in the future. But so the whole area is being structured around a pedestrian street. People can take the bicycle way to the new mass transit system, leave the bicycles there, again, go to the library. These are some of the new schools in some of the very poorest neighborhoods in the city. I'd like to point something out. These neighborhoods don't have pavement. They do have water, they have schools, they have even an indoor swimming pool, because Bogota's school is up in the mountains. But they don't have pavement. You have to choose. But we have an almost luxury pedestrian street. This is a symbol that people are more important than cars, that this is for a community, this is for the community to meet, to play, to walk. This is por Avenida Alameda. Is another view of this. This is another view of this that you can see going through these poor neighborhoods. Again. Why is why is public space so important? I would say, you may say that this is almost frivolous in a poor country, in a poor city. I would say that it's precisely in those countries where pedestrian public space is most important. Poor people live in very small houses. Very small, 30 square meter, 40 square meter. So they need public space. During work time, the high-income person and the low-income person are equally happy or equally satisfied or dissatisfied. It is when they're going to their leisure time that there is an enormous difference, because the upper-income person can go to a large apartment with a garden, goes to clubs, to country houses, to vacations. And can you imagine what can a poor person do and their children on a weekend on a third world giant city? They have no alternative to television different than public pedestrian space. Therefore, I would say that a democratic society, the least of the least that it must offer its citizens is quality sidewalks. Parks are not a luxury. Parks are as necessary as hospitals or schools. This is not some sort of frivolous expenditure. They are just as important as these other things in order to create a more egalitarian society. Also, there is something fascinating that happens in public pedestrian space. In our very hierarchical societies, The rich person may meet the poor person. They serving the coffee or cleaning the office. But the interesting thing, if they meet in public space, is that they meet as equals and not separated by hierarchies. What would this person do if they didn't have this pedestrian street here in this low-income neighborhood? They could, this is a new pedestrian street in another Colombian city, because much of what we did has now been taken in other places. This is what I would call a picture of underdevelopment. These are people that are not respected. The important people in this society are those that came in cars, not sidewalks. You know? Again, all over the third world, this is a symbol of lack of respect for human dignity. I was almost impeached for this, for taking tens of thousands of cars out of parking bays and making sidewalks. It was very, very difficult, and it's really, I was almost impeached. I'm not saying this is not just figurative, it's real. This is the type of sidewalks that we built all over the place. We had to tell people, because they would tell me, Mayor, you are very stubborn. There is enough space in the sidewalk to carve out a parking bay as well as for people to walk by. So we had to explain in some TV commercial that sidewalks are not relatives of streets, that really sidewalks are not for getting from one place to another, that they are for talking, for playing, for kissing, for doing business, for many things, for enjoying the city, and that they really were relatives of parks or plazas, and that it would be just as absurd to say that you could carve out a parking bay on a sidewalk as long as there was enough space left for people to walk by, as it would be to say that you could turn a park into an open-air parking lot so long as you leave enough space between cars for people to walk by. But it was a very difficult war. This is the way roads in Bogota were before. This is one of the main avenues, the one that goes from the airport to downtown. No sidewalks. All big roads in Bogota over the last 60 years have been built without sidewalks. I mean, how can a citizen feel there? I mean, you may think this is an insignificant issue. It's not an insignificant issue, because what can they do? If you don't have a car, if you don't have any place to go for your leisure time, this is the type of roads that we build. We did build roads as well, but bicycle paths, big sidewalk, lights for pedestrians, trees, benches. I mean, a city for people, not just for cars. In many places, in intersections, the sidewalk continued in low traffic intersections, so the cars know they are going into the pedestrian space and not the contrary. This is a symbol again of respect for people. We turned this main street down in the center of the city into a pedestrian street. Parks. We built more than 1,200 parks, from micro parks, such as I showed before, to some more medium and even larger ones. Again, because this is very important for quality of life, and I think this is one of the reasons why crime has gone down. I mean, what do people in these houses do on a weekend, on an afternoon? This was a park that was, the mayor before me started to create. It had been abandoned for decades, and we finished it. Now we get 300,000 people every weekend in this park. What would these people do if they didn't have this? And these children, again, this is part of the same park. Parks were so unimportant that a former mayor had given $50 million worth of very central parks to the professional soccer teams, and nobody had complained. Instead, I became public enemy number one of the sports community when I was able, through legal means, to retake this land again for making public parks. This was one of the land that had been given to the soccer teams, 13 hectares. What they had done here was to become this a trash dump. This is why it has 6 meters above the ground level, and they charged for each truck that would dump trash there. They didn't even make the private soccer clubs they were supposed to do. This is one of the reasons why we were able to retake the land. This is the park that we rebuilt, as I mentioned, that now gets 300,000 people every weekend. But even in the poorest neighborhoods, these playgrounds with basketball courts and things are important. No pavement. We did build schools, sewage, water, but no pavement. But this is a different reality from the United States. It's almost difficult to imagine even how this is the poverty here. Here we paved only one street for buses to come into the neighborhood. All of this we were able to legalize and to give them titles of property and all sorts of things, and also to build a park. Sometimes the parks were almost vertical because there was no more space. Here is a pumping station for the water pumping station to go up the hill to the highest areas in the city. We had to take 3 stages because the water would not go up at once, so we had to build 3 pumping stations. And so on top, we put some basketball courts, and we bought a lot of land that we left for the future because maybe I thought some other mayor would not be so crazy as to think parks were important. And so we bought land in very crucial areas because otherwise in 5 more years or 10 more years, this would be urbanized and this land would be lost forever for the next 1,000 years. So we bought a lot of land for park. This is a sign that says here and park will be built or whatever for the community. Okay. The city center is also very important for social integration because that's where the rich and the poor meet. I mean, city centers, of course, are important because they are the tradition, they are our roots and our cultural roots and all of these things, but also because it's the place where people meet. But it had become such a degenerated place that people would not go there anymore. And it became very dangerous, and all the offices moved away from there. So we demolished this whole area, 2 blocks away from the presidential palace, 20 hectares, which had become one of the biggest areas of drug and crime in the city. The crime rate dropped like this. They were such organized criminal organizations there that we even had some people killed with grenades as we were doing, but military grenades as we were doing this process. And of course we had a lot of social work to help these people, as I mentioned before. This is the type of land that we opened up. Why is important the park? Because I think if we have a park and we don't have this crime sector, this will attract a lot more housing and families and children to downtown. And we left some projects to develop housing as well around there. The presidential palace is only 2 blocks away from here. This is the park that is now being built here. This is at the presidential palace. You see how close? This is the Ministry of Finance. This is where this place was. If a tourist went downtown and took a wrong turn, he would not leave the area even with shoes. We had some public spaces in the downtown invaded by vendors that created also a lot of crime in the area. Who are the most affected by this type of thing? Because sometimes people say, oh, these vendors are poor. All of these vendors had cell phones, cars, all sorts of things. They were zero poor. But the poor people that walked by there were very affected. No rich person walked by there to take the bus. Nobody. The people who walked by there and were affected by crime were very poor people. The ladies that used to work cleaning at the city hall used to tell me, because there were a lot of protests and all of this against us for doing this, and the ladies would say, oh, Mr. Mayor, please don't go back on what you're doing because we already feel so much safer when we go to take the bus in Carrera Décima. Anyway, this is what we did downtown again, a pedestrian street. We're one of the main streets there. Some more parks downtown. More of the same parks there. Here it used to be even a graveyard in this park. What gives character to a city is pedestrian space. You have never heard somebody coming back from Paris talking about French highways. I mean, you know. This is what is memorable about a city. What you take away with you when you go somewhere else in your memories is what happens. Parks are where people integrate. This is in New York, but Central Park people meet all sorts of people of all cultures, of all economic levels. When shopping malls replace public space as a meeting place for people, I think this is a symptom that a city is ill, and this is what is happening much in the third world. When people, if public space deteriorates, the upper income people have many alternatives. They go to their gardens, to their clubs, and even to shopping malls, to vacations. But where do the poor go? They have no alternative. So And the poor feel very uncomfortable in a shopping mall. They don't feel welcome because they feel this is for upper income people. So we have to have quality public space so that we have a more integrated society where people of all kinds meet. This is in China, but anyway, we are going, this is Venezuela, Italy, Spain. I'd like to talk briefly about human impact studies. Why? Because everybody now does environmental impact studies in order to minimize damage to plants and animals. The World Bank requires environmental impact studies for any infrastructure project, but no human impact studies. I mean, I just went I saw a road between Delhi and Accra where the Taj Mahal is, and financed by the World Bank, and there must be 200 pedestrians and bicycles and even elephants for each car that goes by there, and there is not a sidewalk, not a pedestrian, not a bicycle way, nothing. This is lack of respect for human dignity. In Colombia, we also make roads. So the least of the least, here, why this is interesting? Because they make this sewage treatment plant in New York, and they put this very nice park on top. This is the type of thing that must be done when you do infrastructure projects. When you go to third world cities, you see there are hundreds of kilometers of drainage canals. If you would only make, and normally this drainage canal have sewage water pipes under them. This is an expensive infrastructure. So if you just put some nice pedestrian spaces next to this, you could have hundreds of kilometers of quality spaces for people at almost maybe 5 or 10% extra cost of doing these canals. Again, this is the type of thing that we did here in these canals, here. In all roads, this is in Germany, but this is the type of thing that should be mandatory in all roads in the third world. This is not some sort of favor to some sort of athletes. No, this is necessary for the low-income person. In Colombia, we built this road that we call the coffee highway between some of the important coffee-growing cities. 4 lanes, 2 in one direction, 2. But there is no sidewalk, so the people have to walk in these drainage canals like this because there is no place to walk. This is a lack of respect for human dignity. This is not democratic, especially when in society only 15% of people have cars. And this costs nothing to do this type of infrastructure. Waterfronts, I mean, we think planet Earth belongs to us all. No, the only piece of planet Earth that belongs to us all is public space. But 99.9% of planet Earth has private owners. But some places are so crucial that they should be public. This is one wonderful project in Boston. They are knocking down highways to make nice waterfronts for pedestrians. This is in New York. This is in Germany. Very different. I live now near the Long Island Sound, 3 miles away. But I could live 3,000 miles away because Long Island Sound only has big, nice houses without public space. In Germany, in Bonn, this is in Bonn, the fanciest apartments in Bonn are against the Rhine River. But between the apartments and the river, you have public pedestrian spaces. This is what we have in Bogota, in our creeks, because we don't have any Rhine River or Hudson River or Michigan Lake or anything like this. Or this is our, so we build parks and a 45-kilometer greenway around it, integrating very poor and very high-income neighborhoods with nice bridges for bicycles. Again, this is 45 kilometers. We had to buy a piece of land out of this club, this golf club, for example. The club people were proposing that we put a wall because, you know, they don't like the view of this poor income neighborhood at the other side of the lake. But you would not believe what a beautiful view they have of the club from here. This is what we did. This was a wetland that had been completely filled up with trash in some poor neighborhoods. So we created, for us in Bogota, to have this waterfront is marvelous. For people there in these very low income neighborhoods. Most of this is wetland that was left as it was because it was in good shape. Only is this part that we had to dredge out a lake because it had been completely filled up with trash and it was not a wetland anymore. I will go very quickly to finish up. I just say that this is excludes poor people because this is a type of this urban design that excludes the most vulnerable people. A 15-year-old person in this society is stuck. They cannot take a bus or a train. They depend upon their parents to take them somewhere, or a 90-year-old person, or a low-income person, because there are also low-income people, even people who come to work there, a maid, for example, a Colombian maid that comes to work there. And maybe there is one, you cannot have low-cost transport and high-frequency transport in this type of low-density developments, because transport distances are too long, and you cannot have high-frequency buses or trains because they would go empty all the time. So we don't want this type of development for many reasons. Besides, governments spend all their money building road infrastructure to support this type of developments, and there is no money for social investments. So, but unfortunately, all over the third world, we're seeing this type of developments. This is in El Paso, in Juarez, Ciudad Juarez in Mexico. We can be certain, this is in Bangkok, in Shanghai, we can be certain that no matter how much road infrastructure we build, it will never get rid of traffic jams. We have to adopt a completely different model. Transport is not a technical issue, but a political issue. Are we to provide efficient mobility for all, or to minimize traffic jams for the higher income groups? The answer apparently is obvious, but this is what we do all over the third world. This is a real picture, this is Caracas, you know? A big road for the upper income people to go to the beach, and then this. Then you pay the price sooner or later in the developments that happen there later on. Trying to solve traffic jams, building more road infrastructure is like trying to put out a fire with gasoline. Or some other people have said that it's like trying to solve an overweight problem loosening your belt. Because as you build more road infrastructure, the city grows farther. And so the 10 years later, or 20 years later, the big new roads will be jammed. There are studies in the US that prove this. It would take 100 years for Colombia to have the typical infrastructure in highways that a typical US city has. And yet, time lost in traffic jams in the US is increasing every year. What to do then? I think what we have to do is that we are not going to build more road infrastructure to solve peak hour traffic jams. Listen, it's not that I'm saying we should not build more road infrastructure. Some is needed, but not the road infrastructure that is designed to solve peak hour traffic jams. Traffic jams may be very useful. If we think as urban designers that it's important that people take public transport, and it's important that people don't live out in the suburbs, traffic jams may be very useful because they force people to take public transport and to live close to downtown. And this must be an explicit political decision to restrict cars somehow. And the simplest way to restrict them is traffic jams. I don't have much time to go into this, but this is the ideal situation. Traffic jams, and then these people will think after a few days in traffic jam that it's more intelligent to take the public transport because they will save time. Again here, you know, this is the system that I will describe a little later. We created a system, we put into effect a system where 40% of cars cannot circulate during peak hour times in Bogota every day. Each car has a restriction 2 days a week. And this was very useful and saved a lot of gas and all of this, but our idea is much more radical. We held a referendum and asked people if they wanted to ban car use every day during peak hours, all cars except taxis, beginning the year 2015. And I mean, for most people, this is convenient. But we had a huge campaign by some private interest, paid a lot of advertising, and this would be terrible for the economy, that the country would go broke if we did not have cars during peak hours. 90% of the people in Manhattan don't drive, or 95%, and still I don't see that they are broke yet. But anyway, they knew they were going to lose in the referendum, so they did not ask people to vote no. They asked people not to vote because the Colombian Constitution requires 33.3% for this type of local referendums to be valid. And we won, but we quite did not reach the 33.3% of voter participation that was required. But what is interesting and fascinating about this is that we are able to conceive a radically different way of organizing urban life with apparently very simple measures, which would clearly force people to live close to downtown and not in some faraway suburb. And if they want to live far away, they can live in a town where they can reach quickly public transport anyway. It's fine if they want to live in a small town where they can take a train or a bus, but not in the typical suburb. This is an interesting experience in Bogota we have had for like 20 years, and that we doubled in area. Every Sunday in Bogota, we close 120 kilometers of main arteries during 7 hours. And we get more than 1.5 million people riding bicycles, jogging, etc. It's a wonderful social integration exercise, which is also a very important symbol of the importance of pedestrians. This is what every Sunday is not a very particular carnival. We even started doing it at night, and we got more than 3 million people out in the streets. 0 crime problems in this city supposedly so dangerous. Even thieves were there with their children. 0. More than 3 million people. Again, we did a car-free day in Bogota. We decided one Thursday, a weekday, 0 cars in this 7 million inhabitant city. People will have to take public transport. Of course, it was controversial and all of this. But finally, we did it, and afterwards, people loved it so much that we held a referendum for people to institute a car-free day once the first Thursday of February every year, and this had more than 33%. So now Bogota has a car-free day every year, and not even the Congress or the President can change this, because he will have to have another referendum in order to change this measure. This is the type of public transport that we had. It's very difficult to get people off their cars in order to get into this. So we put into effect this, we don't have money for subways. It's impossible. I mean, a subway can cost $100 million a kilometer or more. So we put in effect this bus-based transit system that is copied from a Brazilian city of Curitiba, but improved. And the people pay when they enter this station. What do they have? We have 2 lanes in each direction, because most buses are express buses. So people can change from the local bus to the express bus and vice versa, and they can change buses as many times as they want. And of course, they can go much faster in this bus than in a car. And now we have like 15% of users of the system are car owners, which is very important when you have only 40% of the people who go to work by car every day. When the bus arrives, these doors open and the bus doors open. Therefore, as people have already paid, you can get 100 people out of a bus and 100 people into a bus in seconds, because they don't have to go up steps or pay. It's fully accessible to the handicapped, for example. These are feeder buses that go into the poor neighborhoods and bring people for the same price into the system, 40 cents of a dollar. Almost 50% of the people arrive to the system in these feeder buses. And it's a very low cost. I mean, it comes to nearly $10 million a kilometer, but because we are making also many lanes for cars and also sidewalks and things like this, but just the bus system may be worth maybe $4 million a kilometer at the most. This is the type of thing that we have. Now we have some bicycle parkings. We begin to build bicycle parkings so that people arrive by bicycles to the main terminals. They leave the bicycle there. They arrive. This is at the place where this 18-kilometer pedestrian street arrives. So they change. Again, this goes into downtown. In downtown, there was not enough space for other cars. So we simply got all cars out and only the buses and pedestrians in this route. This is by the year 2020, we will have more than 85% of a 9 million inhabitant city living less than 500 meters away from one of these trunk lines, with an investment of about $3.5 billion, which is what it would cost to make 1.5 subway lines or something like this. Bicycles, I think, were also very important. We build more than, look at this poverty. This is in Colombia, Cartagena. This is shameful for our society, but the fact is that the only means that they have for transport is bicycles. So to build infrastructure to bicycles against is a symbol of respect for human dignity. This is a Chinese city. This is, people say, oh, always when I talk about bicycles, people say, oh, here it's not possible because here it's too hot, too cold. Look at the way they use bicycles in the Netherlands. Why do they use more bicycles in the Netherlands than in Spain or Italy, when the weather is much better in Spain or in Italy? Because it's much more an egalitarian society. They are not so worried about marking hierarchical differences, such as in Spain or Italy, that a big businessman would never be caught in a bicycle in Spain or in Italy because he would have to show it has a fancy car or something. Cars are more of a status symbol than a means of transport. So I would say that in a city, in terms of transport, a civilized city is the one where a child on a tricycle can go about anywhere, much more than the one that has fancy highways all over the place. I'm sorry to have taken so long. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Penalosa. And now, Ronald Grzywinski from Shorebank Corporation will speak. Do you want to speak here from the podium?
Sure, thank you. You can turn on the lights, too. I don't have any slides. Well, thank you very much. I must say, you must have been mayor for 30 years. Is that right? I mean, how could you achieve all that? Actually, I know, that Claudia told me earlier today that there is a limit of 3 years. I mean, so.
It was. Now it's 4 years. It's a little more civilized, but it's not as good as Mr. Daly here.
Well, he's mayor for life, right? So, such an amazing achievement. Your comments remind me very much of about 30 years ago. Several things were published in this country, of which maybe you have seen. Partners for Livable Places. Do you know that, Bob McNulty? He did a book on the economics of amenities. And then at about the same time, another book was done by an unrelated person on streets as if people mattered, all on the same wonderful theme. I commend your vision. It's absolutely just wonderful. I was thinking as you were talking that perhaps we, the citizens of Chicago, maybe we could hire you to retake Soldier Field and give it back to the people. Are you available to do that? Anyway, and the Bears don't need it. They're only there about 8 days a year, and they lose all the time. So it doesn't matter. Anyway, I do really want to thank you. I want to thank you for coming to Chicago. I think I want to really thank you for being the disciple, the apostle, for this innovative approach and contribution to civic engagement and local community building. And I think also bringing this experience to Chicago, because under the lifetime mayor of Chicago, we have begun to see him practicing some of the lessons that you have done in Bogota, where we only have half the number of people, actually a little bit less than you have in Bogota. But we're beginning to see finally a city that is becoming beautified. Our bike paths, unfortunately, are not separated the way they are, as you've described, or even in Amsterdam, but they're, they got some extra paint, I think, from the federal government, so they paint stripes on the highway and they call it bike path. It's a great system. But I also want to thank you for mentoring and teaching people like Claudia, who has brought a lot of energy and a lot of insight to our own company, Shorebank Advisory Services. And I think finally what I want to do is commend you on two things. I want to commend, perhaps the most serious thing, I think to commend your thinking about how developing cities or cities in developing countries can break out of the box that was imposed on the older cities in the north by the automobile industry, which had an enormous need to sell automobiles, and I think moved us into this sort of present condition that we have of dependency on cars. Now we build fewer and fewer cars in the United States, so I'm not sure who all those roads are there for, but I think there's opportunity to think outside of the box and to really focus on people, the poor people, who are the people that are less able to speak for themselves. In a couple of minutes, what I'd like to do is suggest not so much a response to what you've done. I think that when I think about, you're talking about the quality of life distribution as being more important than income distribution, I'd like to take a few minutes as we get into it to talk a little bit about how our own organization, ShoreBank, incorporates the opportunity to produce as a way to distribute the quality of life. And as you talk about democracy, I'll talk a little bit about how we work to democratize the availability and access to credit, okay, as a way to achieve much of the same ends. In your remarks, you have implied that local economic knowledge, local institutional development, a focused vision, local political will, perhaps above all else, are critical to prioritizing the poor people, the children, and the elderly. I think that we at ShoreBank could not possibly agree more. I think I would observe that you have used the levers of government to effect change and to redistribute the quality of life. At ShoreBank, what we have tried to do is to use the levers of the private market economy, the banks, to effect similar change, to increase the opportunity for people to produce, to become self-reliant, to become happy. So what I'd like to do is I'll take just a minute and I'll say, who is ShoreBank for people who don't know? I can talk on that for hours, but I won't. It'll take me just a minute or two. So what is ShoreBank? ShoreBank is your neighbor, okay? We're about a mile and a half away from here. We've been there for over 30 years. We are, in fact, known and better known in many parts of the world, in Eastern Europe, in Bangladesh, and parts of Africa, than we are in the United States. We are a regulated bank holding company. What that means is that we are a regulated bank, the same as every other bank that you have come to know and love. The banks that bounce your checks, that have the guards looking over your shoulders, the banks that turn you down for loans. We're that same kind of bank, okay? We accept deposits and we make loans. And we are regulated by the Board of Governors of the Federal Reserve System. But the important part of that is that we are a bank that is the same as every other bank in the United States. There is no difference in terms of the laws or the regulations that apply to us. We're over 30 years old. We were created, there are a group of us, Mary Houghton, my colleague, is there, and two others of us, one retired and one unfortunately passed away. Started all this after we left the Hyde Park Bank, okay, some years ago. And we created this new kind of bank in order to demonstrate the potential of the banking system to address issues of social inequality and unequal opportunities for minorities in their access to credit. ShoreBank is owned by 75 private shareholders who chose to place local development on an equal footing with a return on their investment. And that is the most significant difference about ShoreBank compared to other banks. We started in one neighborhood with a failing $40 million bank. Today, ShoreBank is a $1.5 billion organization. It has over 20 operating subsidiaries and affiliates, and it has worked in developing parts of Asia, Africa, and Eastern Europe, and just a tiny bit in Latin America. So I'm not sure why I'm really here, okay? And we have 5 major locations in the United States. So we created it as a model, okay? We created it as a model of what a bank could do if it had the will to do it, in much the same way as you obviously had the will, Mr. Mayor, to do what you have done. And what we've been able to demonstrate so far, particularly in our lead bank, which is here in Chicago, is that we can use that bank to produce an earnings rate now that is comparable. In fact, it is better than other banks. We earn about a 17% return on equity. And each year, year in and year out, we invest between 2.5 and 3 times our capital, okay? So it's about $300 million a year here in the States in new money that goes into neighborhoods to provide better housing, child care, small businesses, et cetera. So the rest of these remarks I'm going to make, they're going to talk a little bit about ShoreBank. But every time I say ShoreBank, think about what is possible with banks everywhere, whether they're in the United States, whether they're in Bangladesh, whether they're in Eastern Europe, whether they're in Colombia, okay? Think about what banks could do. So, what ShoreBank tries to do is to focus not only on access to capital, but it seeks to build economic knowledge at the local level, where as an institution it knows the market and it can work effectively with local and regional governments. Now, what does economic knowledge mean to us? It means developing local entrepreneurs of every stripe. It means creating local capacity, and it means building local markets. What are some examples? Well, right here in the city of Chicago, for the past 25 years, we've had one of our most successful programs, and very little known. We have rehabilitated over 45,000 low-income housing units, all without a dime of public subsidy. They have been rehabilitated mostly by African-American men and some women, who invest their own savings, who buy buildings, and because we have a policy that requires that they do some rehabilitation, that we have to reach agreement with them on a level of rehabilitation before we make the loan, we use the bank's power of the purse strings to force rehabilitation. These rehab buildings also receive environmental attention. We build upon our unique local knowledge, which just keeps growing and growing. And so, as we've gone on, we've also helped these communities and these developers to become more qualified to now start to do retail development. We have developed our one shopping center, not as big as the malls where people hang out, but rather to provide goods and services. But I think what I'm even prouder of is that the people who've done housing are now able to buy other retail businesses and retail buildings and to rehabilitate them. So thus, at the local community level, Shore Bank is able to build on the local entrepreneurial skills. We help borrowers to make good deals by purchasing undervalued properties, investing in them, and helping them to grow as increasingly sophisticated business people and creating a more livable, affordable, and healthy community in the process. In other examples, in Asia and Africa, we started working in Bangladesh 21 years ago, and for a decade did all the financial feasibility work for the Grameen Bank, who many of you have heard of. But I think our even prouder achievement is the work that Helen Dunlap and her associates at Shore Bank Advisory Services have done for the past several years, is they have continued the work that Mary and I started with BRAC, the Bangladesh Rural Advancement Committee. BRAC is perhaps the world's best developmental NGO. It is headquartered in Dhaka. Think of a few statistics. This is a private organization. It has 3 million members. It has produced by itself, it has created and operates 30,000 schools, small elementary schools in the villages of Bangladesh. It has an annual budget of $180 million per year, and 85% of that is earned income. This is a not-for-profit organization. So BRAC, Grameen, in Kenya, KREP, these are all examples of organizations where our work has focused not just on capital access or even institutional capacity, but on helping indigenous leadership to grow. Today, each of these institutions has grown with its customer base and is currently making the transition from being an NGO, a non-government organization, into a regulated financial institution dedicated and devoted to financing the needs and aspirations of small businesses serving poor and low-income people. As part of its effort to build economic knowledge, Shore Bank attempts to go beyond poverty alleviation to asset-building strategies that then serve to support the local economy and local governments. Increasingly, we see our work as wealth creation, whether it is helping individual people to save a little bit every week to make a down payment on a home or pay for higher education, to larger endeavors that also create jobs for others. In all cases, it means building upon the economic and social capital that already exists in those local communities, even in the most heavily distressed communities. It is this kind of local wealth creation, getting beyond poverty alleviation, that is a prerequisite, we believe, to achieving the kind of vision, Mr. Mayor, that you've spoken about this evening. In 1942, not quite that old, but very close. In 1942, David Lilienthal, who ran the Tennessee Valley Authority, published a little book entitled Democracy on the March. Anybody hardly knows about it. And he recounted in that book his experience in running TVA. In that entire book, there was one critical lesson, critical to me, an observation that he made. And that is that the key to development everywhere is to release the energies of local residents. You can't do it from Washington, D.C., okay? You can't do it from the headquarters of the World Bank. Shore Bank could not agree more with David Lilienthal's observation over 60 years ago. The development professionals at Shore Bank have unleashed local entrepreneurial energies every place they have worked. Whether it is a few blocks from here, a very few blocks from here on the south side of Chicago, or in a village in Bangladesh where women are trained to raise chickens, to raise silkworms and weave silk, where cell phone businesses have been created, or the city center of Tbilisi. These women and men have helped to create local, responsive development finance organizations, and they have raised the bar of professional behavior for the local people who manage and lead these local institutions. In Cleveland, they have created large enterprise centers that not only, large meaning like 200,000 square feet, are not only inexpensive places where people can start and nurture their own businesses, but they have become centers for the cultural and business energy of the community. In Romania and Georgia, to cite two examples, they have helped to create an entrepreneurial class of borrowers who have seen what they can do with borrowed capital to supplement their own personal savings and hard work, and are now coming back to the banks that we coached to finance the expansion of those businesses, creating more jobs in the process. In recent years, we've also done a lot of work on the environmental side. From the very beginning, almost 31 years ago, Shore Bank has been a double bottom line company, earnings and development. A decade ago, we took the first timid steps toward becoming a triple bottom line company, adding the environment to those things that are co-equal objectives of what the organization does. We entered into a partnership with EcoTrust, which is based in Portland, Oregon. We subsequently ended up working in a little town of Ilwaco, Washington. It's as close as you can get to the mouth of the Columbia River and the Pacific Ocean and not be in either one of them. And we created there the nation's only environmental development bank, at least for a while, because there are a couple of other people who are making noises now about creating them. And we've used this example, however, to bring the triple bottom line to all of Shore Bank's activities, whether they're on the south side of Chicago, or on the east side of Cleveland, or the east side of Detroit, or in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. Some of the things we have done in Astoria, Oregon, on the Columbia River, we took an old mill site, heavily polluted, that none of the local banks would work with. And we managed to finance the rehabilitation and the restoration of that land, and today it is being developed as a new housing center and the gateway to the city. We've created a private wetlands mitigation bank, the first one that we know of, so that developers are able to sell wetland mitigation rights to each other and do development. We've done product development. We've created oyster shooters that are marketed throughout much of the nation as a way to create jobs and opportunities for oystermen. At the bank in Portland, we have created environmental criteria, and every year the performance of our borrowers against those environmental criteria are measured. In Shore Bank Advisory Services, we are beginning to bring small business tools to environmental organizations like the World Wildlife Fund, which need now to better understand how capital and community building, especially around urban areas, is critically important to environmental integrity. And as we look ahead, we increasingly see that more people are beginning to realize that protection of the environment is in their own long-term self-interest for themselves and for their children. Not only in the Pacific Northwest, where the health of the salmon runs are routinely front-page news, but right here in Chicago. And it may be that it is becoming, as the mayor has said so well, that at least on environmental issues, the equality that matters is that which matters to children. So to conclude, and with a few lessons, I think what we have learned is that self-sustaining community renewal for the benefit of low-income people results only when an environment exists or has been created wherein private investors from both inside and outside the community can be confident that a dollar that they invest today, a dollar that they put at risk, is going to be worth more tomorrow. The goal of development banking is to combine money and talent resources to build a critical mass that will finance permanent development activities. Enlightened urban revitalization projects can enhance the quality of life through job preservation, through better housing, through public amenities, and the opportunities that children cherish. Creating livable cities where equality can flourish is about more than access to capital. It is about developing leaders and entrepreneurs, both public and private. And to accelerate the process, we must everywhere find the ways to release the latent energies of the global banking system, to manage the risk, and to finance those activities that will enhance and not denigrate our cities and our environments. In 1970, the Board of Governors of the Federal Reserve System observed, and I quote, that all bank holding companies possess a unique combination of managerial and financial resources with which to deal with a number of the nation's social ills. This nation and other nations in the world have made some progress since then, and Shore Bank has tried to be in the middle of most of it, both operationally and in public policy formation. But by and large, the world is still waiting. Thank you.
Now, I'd like to turn the discussion over to my colleagues, Professor Mendez and Professor Medina. And Professor Mendez, can I ask you to chair the session? And perhaps Liz Medina could start the discussion with a provocation or a question.
No, go ahead. I'm chatting. Go ahead.
Okay, yeah, I'll try to be brief. First, in these kind of events, I always ask myself, like, what hat I'm going to wear? So, and it's always a tricky question. So at first I thought of, should I wear my hat of a Bogota city dweller? That didn't sort of work well. I have been absent from Bogota for 11 years, and I've been I visit often, and I've been admirer and beneficiary of a lot of the changes that have taken place, but I thought that I couldn't like speak as someone that has first-hand knowledge of Bogota. Then I thought, well, maybe the public space thing, but I've recently developed a knee injury, so I thought that was sort of out of character for me to talk about bicycle. So when actually I developed that biking in the Lakes path, so I thought that's not going to work. So I decided to settle on the hat I always have, which is the professional hat of an economist and political scientist, economist turned political scientist. And so I have several comments. So by and large, first thing to front load is I am profoundly sympathetic to the approach that Mr. Penalosa has spelled out here, and Mr. Grzywinski as well. I think that Latin Americans, it is sort of already common knowledge that Latin America is arguably the most unequal region in the world. I first learned this when I came to the U.S. and I realized that Europeans were shocked at the disparities that they would find in the U.S. and that Americans were shocked at the disparities they would find in Latin America. Each time I would talk to an American that had visited the region who say, my God, I mean, I think that we don't need more equalizing here, but you guys, this is just monstrous, the disparities of income in Latin America. So it is sort of a very recurring pattern, and I think that ever since the topic has sort of stuck with me, and therefore I cannot be more sympathetic to having an elected public official going, or a former elected public official speaking so openly about the need to really tackle head-on problems of distribution and thinking of new creative ways to do that. And I think that overall that is highly commendable. Also highly commendable is the idea that these new thoughts about distribution, I think they match well with some topics that have been around in economic theory, but for some reason economists tend to look down on them, although they have venerable origins, such as, I'm thinking of people like Amartya Sen, for example, who has been urging for decades, okay? We should not just look at income. Development is a problem not just of money, which is just a mean to some other ends. We should look more at what people do with their money. What are the abilities, the capabilities, to use his term, what are the capabilities they have of putting that money to work in terms of developing human abilities, in terms of enjoying life, in terms of performing as members of the society, and so on. So as he's been insisting that economists, please could you stop looking at GDP and start looking also at all these other dimensions of human welfare that are what we ultimately care about. And highly regarded economists have received all the honors that can be bestowed on an individual, but still the idea doesn't really catch fire, and I think that we economists, and I put myself in that crowd, we just keep looking at GDP. And I think that Mr. Penalosa today has made a great exhortation to think not just of GDP, not just about income, but also of all the quality of life dimension, which can be just as important, perhaps even more important, and is a very powerful equalizer. Well, now, I think that Mr. Penalosa, just my only comment, not even a discrepancy, it's just like a kind of question that I would like to ask, is he seems to take a pretty grim view of the possibility of combining this type of agenda of enhancing quality of life in a very democratic and egalitarian way, combining that agenda with other agendas of redistribution that are around. I think that Mr. Penalosa, and it is a very respectable view, but I happen to disagree. He seems to be very skeptic that anything else could work. And I think that not only some of the stuff could work, I think there are very interesting synergies between the type of equalization that you can attain through aggressive quality of life measures, like the ones that he has so eloquently spelled out, and other types of mechanisms of redistribution. And I think now I'm shifting to my political scientist hat. The reason I think that there are some synergies is because we might be right now, and I think it's a question for the panel, maybe Mr. Penalosa's success, and I think that everybody who has visited Bogota agrees that it was by and large largely successful set of policies, that success might be witness to the fact that perhaps we are at what, to use a jargon of the 60s, at the easiest stages of this type of equalization. Mr. Penalosa will be incensed to call this an easy stage after the ordeal of 3 years that he had to go through, which was incredibly hard work for an individual. But I think I'm talking of easy stage as a social scientist, not as a person that had to be there and work in 724, which I'm sure that he did. What I mean by easy stages is I'm thinking more of back in the 60s, economists in Latin America thought, well, let's try industrialization. Okay. And sure, industrialization was tried through import substitution and so on. First years, great performance, okay? Industries flourishing all over the place. What happens after a while, you start running into barriers, limitations, diminishing returns, and so on. And decade later, you're just stuck in the first stage of the plan. So it was, and we've seen that all over the place now. Import substitution, land reform, development of the welfare state. It's always in Latin America, the pattern is kind of sad to look at. Okay? First stage is very energetic reform, creative thinking of elected officials, new fresh thoughts from technocrats and so on and so forth. First decades you see wonderful progress in some fronts, and then we start getting stuck. This doesn't mean that the progress is nullified. I think that Latin America as a whole has come a long way on many of these fronts. Right? I think there are many things that Latin American policymakers can feel proud about. And I think I have no question that a lot of what Mr. Penalosa has talked about today is the kind of thing that in a few decades we will look back with pride. But I'm just wondering to what extent maybe we are going to run a few decades later into the same kind of roadblock because of the lack of lasting distributive political coalitions. And I think that I'm thinking of just a few fronts. For instance, Mr. Penalosa rightly, and I think that it is, once again, it's very refreshing to hear elected officials talking about that. He rightly says, look, its quality of life should be one of the guiding principles. And from this he has developed a whole discourse about the quality of leisure. Okay? Well, yeah, but then why not? Leisure itself is a rare commodity, okay, and might be unevenly distributed. Okay? And I'm thinking, for example, on the type of very leisure-friendly legislation that Western Europe developed at some point in the past that is now sort of part of its social fabric, the ability of just about large segments of the working population in Western Europe to enjoy large amounts of leisure. This didn't come easily. This was the result of a lot of political decisions. Mr. Penalosa is right in pointing out that this is not the magic of the market. This has to be done. It requires political agency. And this is one front in which I think that to create political coalitions to support this kind of redistribution will actually reinforce, will create a constituency, a self-sustaining constituency for the type of equalization that Mr. Penalosa has so eloquently expressed. And plus, for example, I think that Latin America has an experience with the fact that whenever some avenues for redistribution, for social change are blocked, that avenues that could lead to reasonable policies, people end up resorting, or people end up taking the ones that are suboptimal. But what else can they do? I think of that. I remember several economists I met at Stanford. Well, actually, I'm going to out them. One of them was Douglas North, who was completely baffled at the fact that Venezuelans, and this is true also of Colombia, they were willing to take to the streets for the price of gasoline. The government, each time the government would try to raise the price of gasoline, huge demonstrations. And I thought, oh, that sounds familiar. Colombia, we have that as well, or price of electricity bills and so on and so forth. And the reason he was baffled was, come on, how many people really use gasoline? I mean, why are the poor going out to the streets, burning tires, facing the riot police and so on and so forth, so that the rich can have affordable gasoline? Instead, they should be asking for more expensive gasoline so you could have just less cars. I think some idea that will resonate with Mr. Penalosa. More exports and transfer that money to primary education. He was baffled, and I think that his concern was, is this irrational? I think it is not irrational. It is the kind of distributive politics that people engage in when all the other avenues are blocked. So I think that many of us would hate to see this emphasis on quality of life, on public space, on public transportation, on leisure and so on, would hate to see that undermined by this type of distributive struggles that may undercut these efforts. And I think that if we want to prevent that from happening, I think it is good to actually open up a larger debate and a more broad-ranging set of distributive tools that may actually unblock the avenues for reform and progress in these fronts, so that people don't have to resort to these suboptimal and self-defeating types of redistribution. And then the final comment, I don't want to take too much, especially because we've all heard some very enlightened presentations before, and I'm going to make a fool of myself. I think another point where Mr. Penalosa is being excessively pessimistic is with the notion that globalization would sort of saddle us with a set of policy tools, and that the most we can do is to hope for improvements through the urban landscape. I think maybe that is not, that will sort of undercut his own case. I think that you could reasonably argue, look, policies of democratization of leisure, democratization of public space, transportation, and so on, they will create tangible progress in quality of life conditions. Okay? And simultaneously, they will be reinforced with all the other set of tools that we might still have. And in fact, they may even enhance the potential of some of those tools. For instance, he rightly mentioned the quality of urban space as a deterrent for mobility. It is clear that, I mean, you hear the conventional economic argument that, well, taxation means that capital is entirely, globalization means that capital is entirely mobile, and therefore taxes are going to be fixed and so on. But if a logical conclusion that at least I would draw from Mr. Penalosa's presentation is, well, if you provide good quality of urban space, if you provide good, very friendly conditions for human capital, okay, that human capital is not going to be so mobile and so footloose. It is possible to bring that human capital, that talent, into some kind of social pact for distribution locally. Okay? Because, I mean, if you create this very attractive urban setting, okay, you raise taxes a little bit on the owners of human capital, they're not going to go to, I don't know, to Lagos, Nigeria, as opposed to Bogota, Colombia, okay? Just because the tax rate is lower in Lagos, Nigeria, when maybe Lagos, Nigeria at that point is a horrific place, unless they get an enlightened mayor as well. So I think that if anything, this kind of emphasis on the local will reinforce itself with some of the distributive tools that are still available out there that are not being canceled out by globalization, not to mention by the fact that globalization itself can be managed differently. I think that I am of the school of thought that believes that globalization has great promise for development in the third world, and that factor mobility is great, and that hopefully the third world will get the sort of capital surplus that is being generated in the first world and so on. But I also agree with some people that there is a need to some roadblocks, not roadblocks, some speed bumps on capital mobility, so as to allow for some stability. You don't want to have countries subjected to serious volatility and so on. All those are measures that require constituencies. And if you have a multi-pronged attack to the problem, creating broad coalitions of distribution, for redistribution, that attack the front of urban space, and also attack these other fronts, once again, of leisure, of taxation of human capital, of governance, of globalization, and so on, maybe you can have a more lasting impetus for reform instead of going back to the pattern that we is painfully familiar with for Latin America, as part of very enlightened reform for 1 decade or two, and then later we'll start running into limitations. I mean, Mr. Penalosa, I don't know what his age, but he won't be around forever, and so I don't want people 10 years later to say, well, those were the good old times, but you know, now we just can't get any further. We just got stuck at that early stage. So I don't want to take much more of your time, so that's pretty much all I have to say for the time being.
Okay, I'm sure you want to answer, but before you do that, let me add myself a little bit of a question here. And I'm going to be brief, I promise. You started your presentation, that I'm very impressed about, by the way, talking about the formalization of informal settlements, and this is a topic that I'm very interested in. You didn't mention this, but some of the research, the empirical research on the formalization of informal settlements and given titles for housing is beyond owning a house. The research shows that people offer their labor supply in the market increasingly in terms of hours. The allocation of resources in the house changes. Education and health in children improves because of this. So this is quite an accomplishment when this happens. And the empirical research has been done in Latin America, has been done in Peru, has been done in Argentina, and hopefully we can do something about what you have done in Bogota to measure these things. But what sometimes is a little bit problematic is the matter of incentives that this brings. And I'm sure that you have been thinking about this. What prevents people from keep on coming to the cities if the promise is that sooner or later they get formal settlements from what used to be squatters and titles in new land, and how this dynamic process happens in a city like Bogota. So you fix today an informal settlement. Is this given the good incentives for the future, or in a few years you have more of these informal settlements and you have to deal with them? And I'm sure that you have been thinking about this. So maybe you want to share with us about that. Another question that I have is related to education. You said that you choose private schools to manage public schools, right? And I would like if you could elaborate a little bit more on this. This is a topic that is not only important in developing countries in Latin America, in the US, that's quite a topic. So I would like to know if you have some evaluation of how it's working, and anything that you can tell us about this is enlightening. Finally, I said I was not going to take much time. Besides the $1 million from the gates, how did you manage to do all this? I mean, where did all that money for the schools, the libraries, the beautiful roads, the sidewalks, and everything you show us is coming from? How you managed to do that? I'm just curious. Maybe we give you some time to sort of answer the panel, and then I don't know what is the time limitation. Maybe then we open for discussion on the floor, or we have informal conversations. I don't know. Okay, great. So.
Okay, I will try to be very quick. Well, we need to short bank to go to Colombia. If you ever decide to, here there are some brilliant young Colombians that would be very eager to be managers of the Colombia operation, and I am very ready to help in whatever I can.
I can do my best.
I'd like to say that I make emphasis in non-traditional schemes, and not that I don't believe that we have to do everything possible to improve income distribution, except that I really am somewhat skeptic as to the possibilities to do something really effective to transform Colombia into Sweden in terms of income distribution in a brief term. Of course, I think we have many interesting and creative schemes. For example, in Colombia we have what I would call cross subsidies in utility rates. For example, the upper income people may pay up to 20 times more for the same cubic meter of water as the low income people, and we have six groups of people in society, something which is very different than in the US. In Colombia, the telephone is, we have this for telephone, for electricity, for gas, for water, and here everybody pays the same regardless where they are billionaires or where they are very poor. So these are constructive schemes that we have to defend and strengthen and improve. I also think we can, for example, about gasoline tax. I think it's very funny that supposedly the recent mayor of Bogota, who just was elected, who supposedly is the left, you know, this definition of left is very interesting, just gave a big battle so that a big a great effort we have made to increase gasoline taxes, he was able to talk the Ministry of Transport into lowering these gasoline taxes. So clearly you are lowering maybe $40 million in income for the city, which is investment for the poor, and you're transferring this money to the car owners. But I would say that any measure that can be used in order to construct more equality must be used. All I am saying is that there is a certain limitation, especially relative to income taxes and all this. A country like Colombia, for example, even more so, where we have these security problems, we cannot all of a sudden say we're going to charge 60% income tax, because all investments will move to other countries. So in this more and more globalized economy, we have certain limitations, but of course, everything that is possible to do to transform these things should be done. However, I'd like to emphasize that some decisions that we make or not make are the ones that create resources to attend the poor. For example, if we do not severely restrict car use, what happens, as it happens in most third world, that cars absorb a gigantic amount of public funds in terms of road infrastructure. For example, I will tell you one example. When I arrived at City Hall, I received this very fancy study that JICA, the Japanese International Cooperation Agency, had done for Bogota transport. And what they proposed was something completely different than what we did. One of the things that they proposed, for example, was a $550 million on paper. Once you build it, it will cost 2 or 3 times more. But on paper, $550 million elevated highway through some very critical areas of Central Bogota that should have been finished in 2005. So imagine, first I think it's useless because it would not solve anything. It would destroy a lot of quality of life of the city. But beyond that, it's an extremely regressive investment. If you invest $550 million on a road, clearly you have no money for libraries, for schools, for parks. I mean, you can do all of these things that we have done for those $550 million. Even when it's some investment, for example, on subways. Subways are some very favored investment in public transport in low-income countries. But why do many countries prefer subways to these bus systems? For several reasons. For one, they're more prestigious, look more modern than buses, which have an image of being a backward thing. Second, and more important, is because politically in all developing countries you have tens of thousands of these informal transport owners, and so the way to avoid this battle with these transport owners is just to put a subway instead of trying to get the traditional buses out of some roads. And third, also maybe because sometimes there is a lot of more easy to do corruption buying subways than to do things like this. But the fact is that if you do a subway, it may cost $100 to $100 million a kilometer or more. This is extremely regressive because finally you are out of so many, you take so many decisions. So you have to be very careful because here you have many students of public policy. One of the difficult things of public investment is that in private investment, you know what, and it's a good investment. You say we have, the short bank has a 17% return on equity. So it's a measure. You know, an investment is good if you get return on equity. In public investment, everything is good. It's good to make police stations, roads, sewage treatment plants, schools, parks, everything is good. But you don't have money to do everything, so you have to choose what to do and what not to do. For example, in Bogota, there has been a project that is underway, and now they are talking of giving more money to it to make a sewage treatment plant for the Bogota River. It sounds beautiful, you know? It sounds ecological, green. We forget about the French that are behind these contracts and things like that, financing many greens to do all sorts of noise, you know, for them, you know. So it's very nice. The upper income people in Bogota who have never, in 98% of the cases, even visited a low-income neighborhood. They have not even seen it once. They just drive over the river on their way to their country houses, And they say, wow, this is so horrible, you know, this dirty river, how bad it smells, you know. But of course, if we spend $2 billion cleaning the river or doing some sewage treatment plant, we will not have any money for schools, for parks, for all that. I mean, what would you do? To buy 15,000 hectares, which is half of the land that Bogota now has, which would solve almost all housing problems and park problems for the next 2,000 years for less than $1 billion, or to do a sewage treatment plant that will cost $2 billion. I mean, of course, it's very nice to clean the river. We all want to do so. It's very difficult to make decisions when you're making investment. But you always have to be thinking, I agree, in creating more equality. And now for Alicia's more specific questions, I will be very quick. What you say that in order to improve the poor people's neighborhoods will stimulate others to do the same, this is very dangerous to have this argument, because this is the argument some people use in order not to help the poor, because whenever you help the poor, so you stimulate other people to come to the city, for example, or things like this. I really think that it's true that at some point in Colombian system in particular, it had become a way of life. I once met this lady who was a brilliant businesswoman, you know, who I met him in this just recently squatted, or in Bogota we don't really have squatter, but illegal development of land around the city. And so we have this sort of game that people play called tejo, where people throw this thing that explodes. This sort of, I don't know how do you call it, similar to the thing the French play with this the pétanque, you know. But they drink beer when they play in Bogota, in Colombia. So this lady, and I was talking to her, and she said, look, every time there is one of these new illegal neighborhoods coming up, I go and I buy a piece of land, I put a pétanque court, I sell beer, and I have 9 houses, you know. Because after a while, you know, the government comes, legalizes, puts water, sewage, everything, and so. But I think the only way to avoid illegal development is to provide legal housing. I mean, this is why I say it's okay to solve the problems of illegal development, but you have to, more important is to do the urban land reform. This is why I mentioned this. This is what you have to do. You have to have an urban land reform so that you offer the land with a good urbanism in the places where it should grow. What is proven by illegal development is that people, once they have the land, they are able to build the house. So if you are able to provide them with land, with good urbanism, in the correct places and not in some high-risk hill or something, and I mean, there are many ways to solve the housing problem, but the only way to avoid this, I mean, you cannot not solve the problems of the poor in low-income neighborhoods just because this may stimulate more of this. You have to provide good housing. I'm sure people prefer to have nice housing in legal areas with parks and everything than bad housing. And I think this has to be done. This is why I think the most important thing that should, I mean, we are 50 years late for having done an urban land reform, unfortunately. But still time to do something very significant. Private schools managing poor schools. This is a fantastic experience because it's not just any private school. It's a little different than in the US because it's much more common. Here you have many upper middle class neighborhoods in Chicago, for example, where the children go to public schools because besides they have this crazy system where each little district has a great school and so there in Colombia or in the third world, clearly the best schools are the private schools where a few people go. And in order to be able to manage one of these public schools, they had to be one of the best private schools. It was, I mean, they don't make money out of this. For the city, it's less expensive to manage the schools with this system than, but it's not a matter of saving, actually. It's similar in cost, a little lower cost with the project. The measurements that have been done have been extremely successful and favorable to the new system. The idea is not to manage all public schools with this system. It's just to have a few schools so that, because always when you used to go to the unions and say, look, this is very bad quality, students here, oh, these children are so poor, and they don't get books at home, and they don't get good food, and they don't get everything, so it's impossible for them to learn anything. So now we put a different school in a different system in the poorest area, and we are proving to them that it's possible to teach these very low-income children. There have been some measurements that are unfair to the system because they compare areas of the city and how do these schools do in their zone. But they are unfair because in each zone there are some much richer areas and so much poorer areas. So they are comparing the school to the whole zone. And even though these schools, which are in the poorest areas of the city, are showing very successful results. And I would say there is much more than that. What you get in social integration, because the children from the low-income schools, they go and the children from the upper-income schools go and they do a lot of activities together. And I mean, I think it's a very interesting scheme. Again, this is not the solution for public education, but it's interesting as to put some systems to compete in some areas, and so maybe these privates will learn also from some great public school teachers that of course also exist. Money, and where do we get the money to finalize? Basically, Bogota, for several years, has had a good financial situation. We received a good financial situation. We put also new taxes and tariffs. We increased some of the utility rates. We made the utilities more efficient. Former mayor had also done improvements in making healthy finances. And we got about 1/3 of our investment, new investment, 1/3 from there was a capitalization of the city electricity company, and we were able to take out like $450 million from this. But I'd say the important thing is not money. We could have had all the billions in the world with another philosophy, and we could have done elevated highways, subways, pavement instead of schools, pavement instead of, I mean, politically many of the things that we did are very bad investment, especially for a 3-year mayor, because we buy land for parks that is going to be seen only 10 years or later. This land for this housing agency, also the houses, the first houses that were going to really come into to be sold, they are going to be after I am out of the city hall. So, but we try to create sustainable schemes. But mainly we put a lot of taxes. For example, for park maintenance, one of the big problems in the US, by the way, in New York is very regressive. You have Central Park like a jewel, with these rich people who give money to Central Park, and then some other parks in very bad shape in New York. So we were able to pass a law that allows the city to charge a surcharge to the garbage cleaning, how do you call it, the garbage collection bill, in order to mow the lawns of parks and to clean the parks, which is the main cost of park maintenance, to clean and to mow the lawns. So we try to work a lot on sustainability, but I would say the most important thing is not cost. I mean, the road or the public transport, I mean, the transport system is private investment. The buses are private. The cost of the road is basically the same cost of any road that had been built before, with a few stations and things, but it's basically the same cost of any well-built road. So I would say that the most important thing we did is basically good management. The Bogota, you see I had some data about the finances. I will give you some data. This is in real terms, so it doesn't matter, it's in pesos. In 1968, the money the Bogota had was 0.2 billion. 25 years later, in 1992, it was 0.9 billion. Almost no increase in real terms in 25 years. Then, in 94, they already increased to 1.6 billion. But the big increase was between 94 and 2003. It went between 1.9 billion to 3.5 billion in real funds. And this is taxes. And this does not include the utility rates. But what is most amazing is that people were so happy with this, what things that were happening in the city, that the mayor that came after me and that was before me was a very creative guy, and they asked the people to pay voluntarily extra 10% extra tax to the city. And in a very bad recession, they got like 80,000 people, taxpayers, that paid voluntarily 10% extra tax. which is very important not only because they pay themselves, but because this example is important for the other people who usually would not pay, because maybe they say, maybe I won't pay 10% extra, but at least I will pay what I have to pay, and I will not try to hide the income and things. So this is a show of how, when the people see that there is that they see that the money is working, they are even go to the point where they give money to the government. They give money because this shows first that they think they like what the government is doing. Second, that is honest, of course, because if they thought the people in the government were stealing the money, they would not pay extra taxes. And that also that they are relatively efficient. You know, the government is relatively efficient, so that they give money to this. So it's
Great, thank you. So we invite questions from the floor. Maybe, well, you're close, but probably it's better to be close to the microphone. Thanks.
Mr. Peña. Mr. Penalosa. I just want to highlight, I think this conference was basically lessons from experience, and I think it has been a wonderful lesson of not only where to find resources, but how to spend resources. And I think that's basically, and I'm very glad to see someone from a developing country talking about development. Reinvesting the communities, and that's something that is going on here in Chicago, where we're doing urban renewal, but we are displacing a lot of people, and we have the process of gentrification, so finally the effects are for other people instead of being back into the community. So I think that, I would like to ask you, I think that's a key element of just believing and going back into those poor communities after 30 years of being displaced and never being considered. When you bring them back into development and legalize them, you are kind of saying, we believe in you and we want to invest in these people. And I think that has made a huge difference in the city. So I think that it's just to make a question. You believe that there has to be urban renewal, urban, especially urban transformation, but the key element is not to displace those people that are benefit from the investment.
Yes, actually, we don't have the risk of gentrification because we don't even have enough economic development for that. But what we did do is try to improve neighborhoods from both legalization, water, sewage, but schools, parks, and even other programs such as these community organized projects, and even some things that were just beautification. For example, we organized the community for them to paint in colors the houses. And we will have some architects that would show them, look, how your house would like. How's your look? How do you want to paint it? Blue, yellow, orange. And so these houses that in the hill that look very drab normally, once they are painted, they gives them a lot of self-pride and and they participate and they choose the color and they paint, and we help them. We got some private companies to sell us cheap painting, and I think all of this creates a new dignity for the community, and so I believe that in some cases you have to do urban renewal in some areas. And I mean, there's books and books about how this can be done, where people can be bought out or they can become partners in the project, where they can be paid with an apartment in the same area of this. But in most of our cities, I think what we can do is to improve the neighborhoods. In some areas where there was this illegal development without any parks or anything, I think it's necessary to demolish a couple of blocks or 2 or 3 blocks in order to open parks, open green, because in order for people, because if not, as people become, the problem in our city is that as these people in this neighborhood become richer, that they will not want to go away. So I think we have to improve the neighborhoods, and one of the things that these neighborhoods are lacking sometimes is sports facilities, cultural facilities, and parks. And in some cases, I think it's necessary to demolish in order to make space for some more green. But normally, in some cases also you can have the traditional urban renewal, but in those cases mainly I think we need to improve the quality of these neighborhoods.
Terry.
I want to congratulate all of our speakers on making much more explicit the centrality of concerns for quality of life, consumption, amenities, entertainment as issues which can be equally important to jobs and production, which, as we have heard, primarily have been the focus at this university in most of the world, in most of the economic and political magazines, and most political theorizing focuses on jobs from Marx onward. You've made a contribution very much, I would say, not only in Bogota, but precisely because American cities, and I would say more generally, Northern European Protestant cities, have a puritanical view that entertainment and quality of life is immoral, or at least is less important than work. Work is serious. Arbeit macht frei. Whereas the consumption is somehow meant to be frivolous. Coming from a Latin country, that's less taken for granted, but there are, I'm suggesting, as I coordinate a project in 35 countries, we have over 15,000 cities. Many mayors are committed to the same policies you are, but having visited Bogota last summer, having worked with the mayor and with 400 people at a conference there for multiple days, you were doing more creative things. So I would applaud what you showed. I mean, what we've seen in his presentation is just the top of an iceberg. There are hundreds of public administration, public policy innovations which go with this, of how was it done? I mean, that was a question you asked. It would take him days and days to fill it out, but having studied this, I'd say, I have a paper, but look on the websites. Because the city is so creative, there's been lots that is documented there, and there are many, my quick point is, there are many lessons for Northern European and for American cities. So unlike the comment that was made, it's often a person from the U.S. or the World Bank who's preaching to the less developed countries. We in the U.S. are behind Bogota. We are behind Rome. We are behind Amsterdam in knowing how to formulate policies for bicycles, for quality of life and consumption. We can learn, and I think, and I look forward to us learning more from you and from things which you have done in Bogota. And these are things which are likely to spread more and more to Northern Europe as well as to Asia, the rest of the world. And anything that you can do to help to codify, to make this valuable, not just for Bogota, but for Colombia, for all of Latin America. And I'm suggesting we are in distinct need of this in places like Chicago, New York, Tokyo, London, and so forth. So the more you could help codify, suggest, and students here, I'm sure, have not heard many courses where these issues are pursued, but I hope we will see more in the future. So thank you for making such a forceful message, and for the other three of articulating that in different ways. I won't comment on Ron Grzywinski. He's a show in himself, at least I'd say. For those of you who don't know it, read the book by Richard Taub, which shows how important a major innovation this has been worldwide.
Thanks. You want to address any of this?
I think, I thank you.
Okay. More questions?
Okay, I would like to say thank you to Mr. Penalosa. I really admire his work, and I'm from Colombia. I'm from Tunja, close to Bogota. So Bogota is a better city right now, thanks to his work. We can see it, we can feel it. We feel, more happy, when we're in Bogota. We feel safer, and we can walk and go to the parks, which is really awesome. I just want to know that, being away from the country, I don't know how long, and I don't know, you haven't seen the power for, I don't know how many years. But how do you keep in touch with everything what's going on in Bogota, in Bogota? And who's taking care of all the projects that you have done so far? I'm just curious about it.
I think that what is important is that I think that what is most important is what you mentioned. What the greatest change in Bogota is the change in the people's attitude towards the city. This is the most difficult thing to measure, because I cannot have a mathematical way to measure that. There are some polls that ask the people how they feel towards the future, and there is a big change in there. But the important thing is that people are more confident that the future can be better. Also, the very fact that Bogota has become even I would never have expected it. We just tried to survive, but without ever looking for it, Bogota somehow became a model for other cities. We've had, for example, more than 80 missions from more than 35 countries going to see our bus system and things. So this gives like a new confidence to Bogota people in order to be more creative. Not only confidence, but almost forces them to think different. So I am very eager that you, the young people now, the people who are at the university now, the ones that are going to grow next to bicycle paths and to pedestrian streets and to things, when they are very soon running the city, are going to even think out even much wilder things. I think we need some more institutional changes in the planning system of Bogota, for example. I think it doesn't work very well the way it is now, but the most important thing is the vision. I think today, if somebody tried to build, if I had built an elevated highway, when I go to City Hall, people would have thought, great, wonderful, we are becoming more similar to Miami. Now this is progress. But really, I don't think it would have been very much criticized. Now, if somebody tries to build an elevated highway through the middle of the city, I mean, this would be unthinkable. There are some things in Bogota culture that are very ingrained. For example, one beautiful thing that is a tradition for a long time, although we increased it a lot, but it's for 20 years, is this closing of the streets on Sundays, the way we call the ciclovia. And if the police forgets to close it, for example, at 7 a.m. or something, the people themselves would put stones and sticks, whatever. And if a car dares come in where the people are, he's really running risk that because the people have appropriated themselves. And it's very often that we find articles in the paper by some people say, oh, these traffic jams that this get because of this stupid ciclovia, should we get? But if a mayor ever tried to get rid of this, I mean, then he would really be impeached in a week, So I think we are slowly advancing towards a vision. I think we need much more. But I am very hopeful that not only in Bogota, so the fact that I go or not go is not the important thing. The fact is that we have many people now that we are slowly constructing a shared vision of how city and city life should be. And not only in Bogota, I see that in many Colombian cities, they are doing many interesting things that are somewhat inspired in the Bogota experience. The most obvious one, of course, is the current president is financing the bus system similar to Bogota in 6 Colombian cities. Perhaps one of the largest investment projects of the national government at this moment. But beyond that, they are doing parks, sidewalks, things like this. And we have much way to go. I mean, in the United States, for example, we criticize because the US are such a democratic place that they are always experts in criticizing themselves, and we don't like suburbs. But the US has already some fantastic models. I would say, for example, we are sitting in one of them. There is nothing in the world like the American university system. It's, the parks in the US also are fantastic. The national parks, the local parks, everything. The libraries. There is nothing in the world like the libraries in the United States. Local libraries, big libraries, small libraries. And now it's such an obvious thing that nobody talks about it. You don't see anybody talking about the libraries in the US. It's like, unless you know they are there, and it's fantastic. In any neighborhood, you have fantastic libraries everywhere, not the cities. But they are not talked about because they already make part of the social consciousness. Nobody would conceive of a city without a good library network. I'm hopeful that we slowly are also advancing and having a little more shared clarity of what we want in the future. This is my hope, and I hope that we are going to advance in this direction and not all of a sudden change course. Oops.
Okay, thank you, Enrique. I'm afraid that we sort of reached our time limit. So I'm going to invite you to keep the dialogue in a more informal way while you have some food and drinks. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I didn't know the Grameen Bank was also for banks.
It's not.
No,
We just
but it's
worked on
right.
it. No, it's all.